This episode of Gators Breakdown is brought to you by MyBookie. MyBookie will match your deposit by 50% all the way up to $1,000. Head to mybookie.ag and use promo code Gators to activate the offer. Bet, win, get paid at MyBookie. The Gators Breakdown podcast is ready to go. I am your host, David Waters, and you can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SCC. And joining me on this episode, our last episode previewing an opponent for this 2019 season, is Will Miles from his site readandreaction.com and on Twitter at WillMilesSCC. Will, I know last week you said for the bye week you were going to get some sleep. Did that happen?
I got 3 kids, man. There's no sleep, but it was nice to sit down and watch the games and not necessarily have a vested rooting interest in all of them. Though I will have to admit that Oregon Arizona State game I obviously was watching with a pretty keen eye. But that was sort of the fun of it, right? Is all year long you're watching the Florida games and you're seeing how they're doing, and sometimes miss some of those other games that are out there. So to be able to watch that one and to be able to see Oregon sort of lay an egg there on the road was a fun thing to do. But back to this one, I mean, where did the season go? You look up and it's already over with, and obviously we love the sport and love watching it, but it's been one of those things where the season's been so much fun. It's really gone quickly.
Absolutely, man. We'll definitely we'll get into that too. That's kind of where we'll start this episode. I can't believe that the season's almost already over with, and it ends on a big note, of course, with the big rival Florida State. We'll get into a little bit of Florida State talk too, and also kudos to these seniors too that have been through so much with this Gators program. But before we get into all that, remember you can find Gators Breakdown on news4jax.com/Gators Breakdown. There you'll find all the Gators Breakdown episodes and News4Jax sports coverage of the Gators. Also listen and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, or YouTube when using those services. Go out there and please share, rate, and review the show. And on social media, follow Gators Breakdown on Twitter and Facebook at Gators Breakdown. This week will be kind of weird because of the Thanksgiving holidays, so the FSU preview will be out probably Wednesday with James Coleman, former FSU running back, fullback. He'll join me as well, and then probably will release the Talking with Troop on Wednesday as well, where former Gators tight end Ben Troop joins me to get his thoughts as well heading into this Florida State game. So, Will, yeah, man, you mentioned it. Here we are, season finale of the 2019 season. This is it was a camp that started back late July here, and all with that leading up to a first game on August 24th against Miami, and here we are. A chance for Florida to start the season by beating an in-state rival, and then a chance to end the season by beating an in-state rival. And Florida can beat in-state rival Florida State in consecutive seasons for the first time since ripping off that 6-game winning streak against Florida State from 2004 to 2009. So it can also finish with wins over Miami and Florida State for the first time since 2008 in this same season, when they beat Miami 26-3 in Gainesville and beat FSU 45-15 in Tallahassee that year. So, Will, you just look at it, man. This is the last chance to defend the swamp for 2019. Go undefeated at home. Send these seniors out the right way. It's a night game that the crowd has wanted so bad this season, and it's against the hated Seminoles to get the 10th win of the season.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit anticlimactic just because Florida State isn't all that good this year, I suppose. But at the same time, it's a big rival, and whenever you've got the big rival, then that's when you hope everybody comes and shows out. And I'm sure with these guys being their last, a lot of seniors on the team this year, those guys, their last game in the swamp, are going to be pretty jacked. And like you said, having it be a night game makes it extra special as well. I think it's one of those things where I think Bill Sykes came on maybe a year ago and basically said that the winner of the Florida State game has won the recruiting battle that next offseason for something like 8 or 9 straight years. And Florida's really got an opportunity there. Obviously beating Miami early in the year, Miami struggling with Florida International this past week does sort of set up, along with the struggles and the departure of Willie Taggart, really does set Florida up in a position to be able to take advantage in the recruiting. And that's all part of what this game does, beyond it just being a rivalry game, beyond it being somebody that we obviously want to see Florida beat, just so that we can have a little bit of fun on Twitter. It's also an important part of building into next year and the year after as well.
There you go. Well, I'm glad you said that last part because somebody asked me on Twitter yesterday how much, with Willie Taggart struggling or getting fired and Miami and all that stuff kind of going on with them and them struggling, how much that affects recruiting, this year. And I was like, well, for now, Florida's class is pretty much, you got what 6, 7 spots out there that you still got to that you still have to fill with guys who are not committed. Now, none of these guys, of course, we'll get to early signing day in December, but all the commits now, we don't know for sure they're going to sign with Florida, but most of them out there will of the 20 commits that they have. So, in you're right. Saturday's game, it's really not going to go too far into affecting what we're going to see on early signing day and national signing day in the next couple of months. Those classes, as I said, pretty much already decided, at least from the Florida side. Florida side doesn't really have a lot of room right now. You're not going to go get 10 kids that were committed to FSU just because Willie Taggart got fired here, or Miami loses to FIU and you're going to go pick 5 or 10 of those guys. There's just really not a lot of room for Florida. So the struggles of Florida State and Miami this year, and if you can go out Saturday and go pound FSU like you did last year, that's going to help in next year's class and the class after that.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was the same thing with the win last year. I don't think
Yeah.
anybody expected Florida winning that game to flip guys over from Florida State. I think what you expected was it was going to get guys who were looking at Florida State for the 2020 class to maybe take another look at Florida. And if Florida has a guy or two that they have very, very high up on their board who are looking someplace else because Taggart's no longer there, well, Florida might be a home for that particular player. And obviously, they all recruit in very similar places. And so anytime you're the guy who's putting up the 10-2 record versus the guy who's 6-6, that's a big deal. So there really is a big difference between Florida being 10-2 and Florida State being 6-6 versus Florida State being 7-5 and Florida being 9-3. I mean, this game is important from a perception standpoint. Certainly, Mullen hasn't recruited the way Urban Meyer did or even Muschamp did. And in order to get to that level, he's going to have to build based on winning these sorts of games. And you can't lose rivalry games when you're at Florida. And so, the Georgia game has been a struggle the last couple of years, but obviously the season ended on a strong note last year with Florida State. And I think that's exactly what Mullen's going to be looking to do in this one as well.
Yep, Will 5-0 at home this season for the Gators. A 45-0 win over UT Martin. A 34-3 win over Tennessee. 38-0 against Towson. 24-13 homecoming win against Auburn, and a 56-0 victory over Vanderbilt. Admittedly, not great competition in the swamp this season. The Auburn game was everything it was built up to be, and now FSU will get to feel the effects of a revitalized swamp in Gator Nation. Gators stout at home. The competition hasn't been great, but the Gators are averaging a 39-2 score at home, and it's been complete domination of teams at home. But Will, really, because what this defense is doing too, only giving up 16 points in 5 games so far at home this season, 3 shutouts, and Auburn is the only opponent to score a touchdown in the swamp this season.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, the defense has been great all year. I mean, other than the LSU game and the Georgia game, and those are 2 really, really good teams, right? I mean, those are 2 teams that may end up in the playoff. But against FBS opponents, Florida's given up 17.3 points per game, so not too much higher than what they've given up in the swamp. Certainly, you mentioned all of the shutouts, but there have been a couple of games on the road where they've played very well too. I mean, the Missouri game in particular, they played really well. And Auburn's a good team. I think one of the things that obviously, you have the 2 FCS teams that they played at home, but Auburn's a good team. And then Tennessee, Tennessee after the shellacking that they took from Florida has started to turn around. And is that indicative of just Tennessee wasn't playing well at the time, or is that indicative that Florida is a really good home team and sort of put it on Tennessee and wouldn't let them up? And it's probably a little bit of both. I think Tennessee's a decent team. They're not great. But certainly Florida has played strongly at home. I think when you look at all the leading indicators, whether it's quarterback play, offense, defense, you see the same general trend that at the Swamp they've been better than they've been away from it. So it's obviously a good thing to have it there this year.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we'll see Mullen in his Monday press conference did say Mari Burney is further along than he thought he would be and hopeful to play on Saturday. And here's the big one, Will, and that Jabari Zuniga is cleared, and we'll see if Mullen's truthful there. He's had a lot of time off. I would at least think he takes the field Saturday night in his last game in the Swamp. And he was cleared versus the Georgia game and re-aggravated his ankle injury early. He played some inside after that game, but we know he's better outside. He just really couldn't put too much on that ankle there. Nowhere near the type of player we know he can be in that Georgia game. So hopefully he's close to 100%, doesn't aggravate that injury again, because it is his last game in the Swamp. Well, and it'd be a joy to see him play, of course. He's been here for a while. A joy to see him play one more time and really let him play one more time and pair him up with Jonathan Grenard, because this FSU offensive line, I'm not so sure is going to. We saw last year what Zuniga and Jacob Light was able to do against Florida State and Tallahassee. You get this Florida Gator crowd behind this defensive line with Zuniga and Grenard being able to fly off the ball. I'm not so sure. I like FSU's chances there if Jabari Zuniga is 100% or close to it.
Yeah, I mean, the offensive line last year for Florida State was pretty bad. It's pretty bad again. I mean, better this year, I suppose, but not fantastic. They've given the ball to Cam Akers quite a bit, but their running game hasn't really been that good on an efficiency standpoint. So, when you look at yards per rush, they're 108th, which is worse than Florida, who's at 101st when it comes to yards per rush. So Florida State struggled on the ground as well this year, and a lot of that is attributable to the offensive line. And if you were to point to one thing that's the reason that Taggart's no longer there, and there are a lot of different things to point to as to why Taggart's not there, but I would say the offensive line play is really the thing that's the biggest reason that he's not there anymore. And is whether that's fair or not is actually an interesting question, because certainly there were some offensive line issues when Jimbo was there, but they got worse under Taggart, didn't get any better. That's one of the curiosities I have for this game is, the last couple of games Florida State's come out, they've won a couple of games, but one was against an FCS opponent, one was against a Boston College team with their backup quarterback. Are the two wins there indicative that something's turned around since they've made the change at head coach, or is it just that they played a couple of teams that were overmatched and they're going to come up against reality against Florida? And that's one of the things that I think will be interesting looking at this game.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll get into a little more FSU, of course, as well later on this episode. Kind of, their journey through their season, but we know the headline there is already firing Willie Taggart a year and a half into the Seminole season there. So, of course, game starts at 7:30 Saturday night, but around 7:15. We're going to get the introduction of a whole big old group of seniors here that have been through a whole lot in this program. A lot of them recruited by Will Muschamp and having to go through Jim McElwain, and now being able to reap the rewards in their 2 seasons with Dan Mullen so far, and being able to go to get 10 wins last year, go to a New Year's Six bowl, and in Dan Mullen's first year, the seniors last year, these guys were the seniors we're talking about now were juniors last year, being able to go out and turn it around and get a taste of success, and that's what they came to Florida for. And then a year later, a lot of expectations coming into this season with some top 10 expectations, and heck, for the most part, there they are. They're in the top 10, but Florida's kind of living up to the expectation everybody had for them this season. A top 10 team, second in the SEC East. And look, I mean, as you mentioned earlier, the 2 losses to LSU and Georgia this year are nothing to be ashamed of. They're LSU, number 1 team in the country, and Georgia, the way they recruit and what they have, and a little bit of head start Kirby Smart had on Dan Mullen. No shame in losing to them either in games that you were in. So these seniors have a lot to hold their head up high for. As I said, going through what they've went through, and then these last 2 seasons. I tell you what, there's going to be a lot of. There's gonna be a lot of water falling down falling out of people's eyes in the crowd Saturday night, and I might have to wear my sunglasses even though it's a 7:30 game.
A little bit of dust in the swamp there, right?
A little bit of dust in the swamp.
One of the interesting things is that a lot of times when a new coach comes in, he relies on the previous recruits, but eventually from the previous coach, but eventually starts really phasing his guys in. I think that's one of the things maybe we expected to see with a guy like Emory Jones and some of the other guys that Mullins brought in. But the reality is he's had to rely on the juniors last year and the seniors this year in order to move things forward the way he wants to. So guys like Michael Pirine have come out and won the job. Tyree Cleveland has continued to play very, very well. Obviously, bringing in Van Jefferson, but he's one of the seniors. But then you've got Hammond and Swain, who have really become productive members of the team this year. When been a little bit disappointing before that. And then you look on the defensive end with Zuniga and Reese and all those sorts of guys, and just the reality is this is a very senior laden group. That's not usually something that you necessarily see in the second year from a new head coach. A lot of times he's incorporating his guys in there. That hasn't been the case. The seniors bought in. The seniors decided that they were going to buy into what Mullen was selling, and the 10-3 season last year, and then a potential 11-2 season this year are the fruits of that. So yeah, I mean, you look at that and say, hey, we really appreciate the effort that these guys have put in, appreciate sort of working through. I mean, that 4-7 season in 2017 could not have been fun for any of these guys, right? And they hear it. I mean, they hear the criticism that's out there, and they hear the people telling them that they're not any good, and that they want that new recruit in, the new shiny recruit to come in and take their spot. And these guys have held their spot. They've been leaders, and they've been really good teammates too. That's one of the things I think that maybe gets lost in all this. I mean, you think about Cleveland, Hammond, and Swain welcoming in Jefferson and Grimes. Mullen comes in, he brings in these two highly touted transfers, and Jefferson and Grimes have been a part of the offense, but they haven't been the only part of the offense. These other guys have gotten an opportunity too. So being able to incorporate new guys in, and not necessarily caring what happens so long as you're able to win the game. And obviously the 4-7 season sort of sets you up to where you might have that attitude, but not every program does that, right? I mean, I just looking across the field at Florida State, I mean, that's something where I think buy-in was problematic, and Mullen's been able to get that. And some of that is because of Mullen, some of that is because of his staff, but some of that is because of these players who made the decision that they were going to buy in, made the decision that they were going to do what their coaches told them to do, and that it would pay off in the end, and that's what they've seen.
Yeah, I think going through Twitter here, and Florida's released a lot of social media videos towards these seniors and these guys who will be playing their final game on Saturday night. And the first one I'll start with Van Jefferson. I think that was the first one they put in, and he went out and said, "Thank you, Gator Nation, for accepting me these 2 seasons. Made friendships that will last a lifetime. Thank you, Coach G, for believing in me and giving me a second chance. It's truly been a blessing being a Florida Gator." And the thing about Van Jefferson, Will, and you kind of mentioned it here a little bit too, but he trusts Mullen enough to transfer in on Mullen's first season at Florida, and that, to me, that's a lot of belief in a head coach. You're going somewhere who you have no idea how it's going to turn out with a coach going into his first year, and by all accounts, you were going to be here for 2 seasons, and what if the season 1 didn't go well? And he went ahead and trusted Mullen to know. Look, he had a little bit of a history with Mullen, him playing at Ole Miss and Mullen being at Mississippi State, so there was that connection there. But Van Jefferson come in right away, trusted Mullen. And for all accounts and purposes, if you want to name somebody a number 1 receiver in this receiver group, they spread the ball out so much it's hard to really tag a receiver as the number 1 guy. But if you wanted to give it to anybody, that number 1 receiver tab is going towards Van Jefferson and what he's been able to do these last couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, he's been a fantastic addition to the team. Obviously, I think coming out of camp last year, everybody realized he was the best route runner, made Florida State look pretty ridiculous last year in the game. And especially since Trask has taken over, I think Jefferson has become a even more utilized guy in the offense, and a lot of times he's the guy who gets the double team, which opens up things for guys like Kyle Pitts or for Hammond and Swain, right? I mean, at some point when you get these guys out there 5 wide, the defense has to make a decision, and Jefferson, one of the things I would say about all these guys at receiver, at least, is just the sure-handedness of all of them is really, really impressive. Very, very rarely do you see a drop pass, which has been critical because the Florida quarterbacks have struggled at times. And so being able to know that when the ball's in the vicinity that the guy's going to go get it, I mean, that's a skill just like route running. That's a skill just like the speed to separate and all those sorts of things. And I think Jefferson is sort of the leader of the pack when it comes to that, has taken to some of the coaching by Gonzalez, but also just brought some of his natural route running ability to Florida. And certainly I'm sure has challenged the other guys to step up their games as well.
Absolutely, and to kind of follow what Florida was doing here, Adam Schuler was the next one they gave a shout out to, and Adam Schuler says, "I just want to thank you, Gator Nation. I have got nothing but love since transferring into this program. It has been a great 2 seasons with you guys. Special thanks to Coach Mullen for giving me the opportunity to compete and further my education. Play I remember, Will, is from him. It's kind of an unsung play, an underrated play, but last year versus Tennessee was kind of Adam Schuller's coming out party, and that safety that Florida had. He didn't make the tackle, but it was him getting upfield, kind of forcing the running back to go outside. Where I think it was CeCe Jefferson who ended up making that tackle in the end zone. But that play did not happen, would not have happened if it wasn't for Adam Schuler. And ever since that Tennessee game, he's been a force on the inside of that defensive line.
Yeah, well, that was right down in my end of the end zone when I was there, and that was really the play that shut up the Tennessee fans there in Knoxville. They were still a little bit loud. I think it was 14-0 at that point, and they were still a little bit mouthy. But once the safety came, Florida got the ball back, and then I think was able to complete the long pass to Swain, and that was sort of the end of it. But yeah, I mean, where would the defense be without Schuler? I mean, I think a lot of people say the same thing about Grenard, but Schuler last year was a real. Not only was he a force, but he was a stabilizing influence when they had some struggles up front at defensive tackle real early in the season. Came in, like you mentioned, his coming out party was against Tennessee, but he played very, very well all the way throughout the year. And in Grantham's defense, the tackle isn't necessarily going to be the guy who gets all the glory and busts into the backfield and makes all these tackles for losses. A lot of times he's there to occupy a couple of offensive linemen to allow the linebackers to roam. And, 2 years ago, David Reese would get caught by offensive linemen and struggled in coverage and all sorts of different things. But Schuler's a big part of why he's been free to roam back and forth and why he's been able to do what he's been able to do the last 2 years. And I don't think that's something we should overlook.
Absolutely. The next one here we'll go to is Michael P. Ryan, running back, of course, here. And he says, "Thank you, Gator Nation. Hard to put into words how much emotion I have built up for senior day. Played with a lot of great players and built lifelong friendships. Came in as an 18-year-old kid and leaving a 21-year-old man." Going back to last year, Will, for him, I remember when we did our kind of over-under season preview for the 2018 season, dating back to last season. I kind of pegged P. Ryan with that not enough respect tag for players, and boy, did he kind of show up that last year, especially late in the season. The big run versus FSU to get the touchdown there, the big win versus Michigan. Then, of course, this year the big run and one of the highlights of the season versus Auburn to basically put that game away there. Michael P. Ryan not having the senior season a lot of us predicted out of the backfield, but still being the versatile player that we saw in the Peach Bowl last year. That's kind of bled over into this year as well, as being that pass catcher out of the backfield or lining up as a receiver. And heck, kind of forgetting about that great catch he made versus Missouri last week as well in the last game. And yeah, senior season may not have gone as planned, but LaMichael P. Ryan couldn't ask much more as far as effort and a guy just really wanting to be a Gator and that kind of just working out the way it did.
Yeah, I think one of the more impressive things from this year is just you've never seen him get discouraged. You've never seen him pout. You've never seen him wonder about his role, those sorts of things. And obviously we've heard a lot about Pierce and whether he's the better fit for the way the offensive line is, but Pirine just sort of puts his head down, continues working, and against with an offensive line this year that struggled. There's no doubt that it struggled, has still managed to be a critical cog in the offense. And in a situation where Mullen has gone away from the run quite a bit and has done so intentionally, when you've listened to some of his comments over the last couple of days, Pirine's found a way to be useful in that, whether it's in pass protection or whether it's catching the ball, like you mentioned. So, a critical cog to the offense. And it's funny, you never notice when the running back picks up the blitz, like rare, or when he's in the right place to be an outlet. You certainly notice when he's not in the right place or when he doesn't pick up the blitz. But that's one of the things I think that this year I can't remember a time, and maybe there is one, but I can't remember a time where Pirine whiffed on a block and somebody was able to get to Trask. There have been times where maybe he got overpowered by somebody who was just a little bit bigger, but he's always in the right spot, always making the block that he needs to do, and really proving himself to be a 3-down back.
Now, some of these players, may have expressed their gratitude on other social media sites, but this is what I was able to find on Twitter here. So a couple more that had good things to say here. Josh Hammond, wide receiver, he goes, "Man, this was tough to put into words. The friends that have become family, the experiences, the ups and downs through football have all molded me to be the person I am today. Forever grateful for the opportunity I was given to be a Gator. Thank you, Gator Nation. And probably just, of course, the big pass reception, of course, Miami to open up the season with Josh Hammond way downfield, and then of course the in the round versus Kentucky to basically put that game away, sought that game away. We just wanted him, him and Freddie Swain. Coming together, as you kind of mentioned earlier, Will, and we expected a lot more of those guys early on, and Jim McElwain's offense and wasn't getting it, and look, as we can see now, no fault of their own. Probably just not getting the right amount of coaching and developing in that previous staff, and not really a quarterback to get developed to help these guys as well. But Josh Hammond, who look kind of is in a funny way. The joke of social media out there, because it seems like he's been at Florida forever. He looks like he's 35 years old, but it looks like he was here before Frankie, his older brother, was here. That's kind of the way it seems. But good on Josh Hammond and good on a lot of these players here for they didn't have to come out here and express their gratitude and share their memories about Florida, but here they are doing it. And for as far as we'll get into Swain some more just a second too, but those two guys. For everything they've been through, and it didn't look like they were going to live up to their 4-star status. You get a brand new head coach, and you end up playing like it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you get on the field with Mullen as a wide receiver by blocking. And that's really sort of what I think I'm going to remember from these two is that, Hammond and Swain, like you said, we'll talk about Swain in a minute, but Hammond is an outstanding blocker and has gotten more and more opportunities because he's earned the trust of his coaches by going out there and doing the little things. And, the problem under McElwain is that the big things were missing. So, so the guys who did the little things, it didn't necessarily make a whole lot of a difference. But certainly Hammond has proven adept to do that. And like you said, he's proven to be a good sport with all of the all the memes and all that sort of stuff. But it is interesting. I mean, you mentioned his brother Frankie, who was here. I think that's sort of one of the reasons why it feels like he's been here forever. But the other thing is it's a rare thing to have a guy who's as talented as Hammond or as talented as Swain stick around for 4 years. So to have somebody stick around for 4 years to play as a true freshman and sort of go through all of the trials and tribulations that the fans have gone through and go through that together, I think is a unique thing. And he's been here for a while, but not as long as Hunter Renfrow was at Clemson. That's the only.
Andre DeBose too at Florida.
Well, DeBose is still on Florida's roster, isn't he?
Somewhere, I think so. Yeah. And we mentioned we'll go ahead and go to Freddie Swain here too. And last year, Will, you mentioned last year the catch against Tennessee. That was something I just didn't know he had in him. Franks is shuffled out to his right. He finds a Swain crossing the field. He catches it, stays in bounds, and then gets upfield. And here comes, and he had to slow down to catch that pass. I'm like, okay, here comes some defenders that's going to catch him. He ends up, he gets a few yards, and all of a sudden he's starting to run away from defenders. I'm like, whoa, I did not know Freddie Swain had that type of speed there. And then that big catch this year, it goes back to one that sticks there, that diving catch versus South Carolina in the rain, and Kyle Trask, throwing it up there in the corner or in the front pylon of the end zone. I mean, what a great adjustment, great catch by him. And just one player that after the first 2 years, I didn't know what to expect, but then going back to that Tennessee game last year and kind of just blowing me away with how fast he was. And then, heck, in the Auburn game this year as well. I mean, he was able to show it there too. It's just one of those players that I think I was surprised every time, and not in the bad way, but just surprised every time the big play came from Swain. I was just surprised how it happened.
Yeah, I would say the Auburn play is the one that I think exemplified what he meant to the team. That he was the guy who got the one-on-one coverage. You've got Trask. Nobody really knows. I mean, he hadn't really been tested at that point. Had the comeback against Kentucky, the big win against Tennessee, and then the game against Towson, and now you're playing Auburn. And the question is, what do you have from Trask? And he finds the one-on-one coverage, and then off he goes, and able to split the defense and really sort of set the tone for the game. I mean, Florida was up 7-0 right from the start, and even though the offense couldn't stop fumbling the ball there in the first half, sort of set the tone, put Florida ahead of Auburn, and made Auburn play catch up throughout the game. And then the other thing I'll remember is all the punt returns. When was the last time Florida dropped a punt return? And we haven't necessarily seen explosive returns in the punt game, but we also haven't seen muffed punts at all in the punt game either. And that's one of those things where special teams is important. It's a big part of the game, and Swain has been a huge contributor on special teams for an extended period of time. And in fact, I think it was last year he injured an ankle, and that was the last time we saw a fumble on a punt. I believe Kadarius Toney dropped one when he was filling in for him. So, again, I mentioned that these guys never drop passes. Well, Swain never dropped punts either, and that's a big part of why he was back there. And quite honestly, is probably a big part of why he might end up playing in the next level, just because somebody who can catch a punt and make sure that you maintain field position is an important asset to the team.
And one more receiver, of course, Tyree Cleveland was on the verge of a 5-star recruit when he was recruited at Florida, and probably the last couple years haven't gone the way that he pretty much planned because of the way he started his career, Will. And I'm telling you, two of the most clutch plays in Florida Gator history come from Tyree Cleveland here. And you go all the way back to his freshman season when Florida's fighting for the SEC East, and they're going to Baton Rouge, and they're backed up on their own 1-yard line, and Austin Appleby throws up a one-on-one pass to Tyree Cleveland. He shrugs off a defender, and he races 99 yards for a touchdown that goes a long way in Florida winning the SEC East that year. And then also the next year. It wasn't, it was Jim McElwain's last year, so a lot of it didn't amount to anything. But anytime you beat Tennessee, it is a good way. And this is the second time in a row in the swamp where Florida was able to break Tennessee's heart. And this time it was Franks to Cleveland for the heave to cleave there. And Florida beats Tennessee at the buzzer. So as far as two of the most clutch plays go in Florida history, Tyree Cleveland's up there with those.
Yeah, well, I mean, from a statistical standpoint, I think you're right. It's not what everybody necessarily expected to see. But obviously, Cleveland's had some injury issues that have limited his productivity as well. But whenever you've got one of those plays that shows up whenever somebody wants to, every year on CBS, that thing's going to show up when Florida's playing Tennessee at 3:30. That and the Antonio Callaway play, and then going back to some of the Peyton Manning, Danny Werfel battles, and those sorts of things. Those are the things that show up in the montage, and Tyree certainly has a place in Gator lore with that play. I mean, coming off of the hurricane, I remember flying down for that game, not knowing whether I was going to be able to get gas to get up to Gainesville. You get up there and they were just sort of giving away free tickets because they didn't know who was actually going to be in Gainesville at the time. And then to have the swamp still almost 80 or 90% filled, and then have that be the play that ends the game. After I think we all had hope that Franks was going to sort of turn a corner and Florida was up, and then Tennessee came roaring back to tie it, and then you get that play to end the game. So yeah, again, I mean, Cleveland's been a class act all the way through. Mm-hmm. Again, yeah, and you can say this about all of these seniors. Yeah. They've all been class acts. They all, I can't recall hearing any grumbling from anyone about playing time, about not getting the ball past their way often enough. And, I think if we want to point towards one of the things that's helped Kyle Trask succeed, it's that he hasn't had to worry about managing who's getting the ball when and those sorts of things. He's just sort of picked out the open guy and thrown it to him. And, to have that kind of unit, to have those guys who are setting the tone for the team, I think is an important thing. And certainly Tyree Cleveland is a big part of that.
And then let's move to the other side of the ball here. And Jabbar Zuniga, of course, senior season not turning out the way he wants because of the injured ankle, high ankle sprain that happened against Kentucky. Just hasn't really been able to shake that injury there. But I know it wasn't a losing effort. But go back and go to that goal line stand versus Georgia last year, where that goal line stand kept Florida in the game by settling Georgia starting on the 1-yard line and not being able to get anything. And Jabbar Zuniga was in almost every play of that little drive here. And man, it stinks for him, of course, not to have to play his whole senior season. Hopefully, he is 100%. We get to this FSU game here, and for the last time we get to see him, he puts on a show.
Yeah, well, you hope that the tape that we saw against Miami is what we see against Florida State, right? With Grenard and Zuniga running wild, because that 10-sack opener against Miami is really the only time that both of those guys have been healthy throughout the entire year, and they were able to really terrorize the Hurricanes. Now, I think you might say that the Hurricanes aren't really that great to begin with, especially after what we've seen recently, but at the same time, 10 sacks is 10 sacks, and even against an FBS team or an FCS team, you'd say that's a significant that's a significant thing. So, and certainly, Zuniga was the guy who everybody pointed to and said, hey, he's the guy who's going to have to replace Polite. And he started out being able to do that this year, but, he wasn't a slouch last year either. You mentioned the Georgia game, but there were other games where Zuniga was a big part of the game plan. And a big part of allowing Ja'Kai Polite to roam free, right? And that's one of the things that I think Zach Carter stepping up the last few weeks with Zuniga out has allowed Grenard to sort of roam free and be a little freelance is the wrong word, but has been able to allow Grenard to do the things that he's really good at. And I think Zuniga did that a lot last year for Polite. So, for a guy who came in and a 3-star guy that I'm not sure everybody, certainly people like me didn't say, hey, this is going to be a can't miss guy. Whenever you get those guys who go and work and turn themselves into elite guys in the SEC, it's somebody you got to tip your cap to.
Absolutely. One more player here on the defensive side, of course, kind of the headliner here. David Reese, the linebacker, of course. I don't know where this Gator defense would be without him, and not going to wow anybody with size or anything at the middle linebacker position, but 16 tackles versus Kentucky this year, and you go back to the year before that where Florida missed him versus Kentucky. And I don't know if Florida wins that game or not if he's on the field, but you have to like Florida's chances with what he's been able to prove every time Florida's going against a kind of run-heavy team. That David Reese is there making tackle after tackle, and he's just been that steady presence on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, well, in 2017, Reese got picked on a lot in coverage, and that was one of the things where I think you looked at it and said, he can plug holes against the run, but he struggles when it comes to picking up backs out of the backfield. When's the last time Florida got torched by a back out of the backfield? I can't really remember it, right? I mean, there have been times
LSU, I guess.
Well, but not throwing it, right?
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, I don't recall times where Reese has been isolated on backs out of the backfield and Florida's just gotten continuously torched like they did back in 2017. Now, some of that is the defensive scheme, but some of that is on David Reese, who's become a more complete player as he's played over the course of his 4 years. And so we sat there and looked at a sophomore and said, coverage is a real weakness. And now I look at it and I say, maybe it's not his strength, but it's not necessarily a weakness that people isolate and say, we want to get our guy on this linebacker. That's not the way it works anymore. And in fact, there are other places that people pick on in the defense significantly more than they do pick on Reese, because Reese has really made himself into a much more complete player. Now, I mean, at the next level, is he a 3-down linebacker? I think that's something he's going to still have to work his way into, but at least, there's not a program in the SEC that wouldn't take David Reese as their middle linebacker right now. And I think that's one of the things that, sort of in the long line of guys like Antonio Morrison and Seiler and Brandon Spikes. And, Reese isn't necessarily maybe as good as some of those guys, but I think he measures up real well in Gator history in terms of the overall contribution he's been able to make over his 4 years. And from a leadership perspective too, back in 2017, letting people know it was unacceptable the way they were playing after McElwain was let go. And Reese sort of stepped up as a leader at that point and has taken that mantle ever since.
Yeah. And we'll get into some, some of the lesser known players here, of course, that'll be also celebrated on Senior Day. And Will, you made sure to point out here, center Nick Buchanan, they're good on him because we went into last year thinking TJ McCoy was just going to step in right at center, who played center in Jim McElwain's final season, and just assumed he was going to be the center when Dan Mullen lined up his first offensive line. But there it is, Nick Buchanan, and it really was part of that offensive line last year that got better as the season went on, and was really a strong force in helping the run game get going. And of course, the run game got going and made Felipe Franks a better quarterback as well. But this year, offensive line much maligned there, but because of the run game struggles there. But good on Nick Buchanan for being able to come in last year and hold that center spot down there for 2 years now for the Gators.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm not sure that the offensive line struggles this year because of Buchanan.
Mm-hmm.
I think we can point to other positions, but I've never sat there and looked at the center and said, oh, he blew a block. And for as much as Florida's in the shotgun, don't recall any bad snaps either. And, the center is a guy that you're not necessarily going to see unless he's doing something that that's so bad that you notice it. And we haven't seen that a lot this year. And Buchanan's been a solid contributor. And that's one of the things I think we we lionize these guys who make the big plays or who are absolute stars, but in any team, you need a bunch of solid contributors to be able to win 10, 11, 12 games. And Buchanan has been one of those solid contributors who's really been a cog that has allowed Florida to excel these last 2 years.
A couple more there in that same realm there. Luke Ankrum had the interception versus Tennessee last year on the screen pass, the running back screen pass that was able to set Florida up in really good field position to start that blowout early on. Jawan Taylor, the safety there, couldn't stay healthy a lot of time, a lot of shoulder problems for him, but was kind of instrumental last year in the Peach Bowl. How he was able to play a big part there. And of course, we have to mention, punter Tommy Townsend. Of course, he was a transfer in as well, not necessarily recruit, but much a transfer in like Van Jefferson and Adam Shuley here. But the Ray Guy semifinalist for the second year in a row, didn't make the finalist there. I don't know, who votes for that award, but the Florida punter always seems to get screwed out of winning that award there. So not sure how it happens. His brother got it screwed out of it too, but we'll kind of see that. We'll see there. But yeah, some unsung guys, and special teams guys also, But Tommy Townsend's pretty popular Gator.
Yeah, how did we not talk about Townsend last week with Nick De La Torre on the podcast?
Yeah.
We should have brought him up. He's always the one who's going after the punters. But yeah, I'm not sure if there are any Townsends left. We'll have to figure out whether they've got cousins or something because they keep. I mean, again, how often is the field flipped? Because of Townsend being able to put a 55-yarder with a ton of hang time and the ball doesn't get returned, or being able to pin the opposition inside. You don't notice the punter until he shanks one. Just like you don't notice the field goal kicker until you're begging for Eddie Pinheiro to come to your program because you've got a walk-on or a dental student kicking kicks for you. So Florida's really been blessed from Eric Wilbur to Johnny Townsend to just sort of all the way through, always having very, very good punters, and Townsend's one of the guys in that line. And then you mentioned Ankrum with the injuries to Zuniga and Grenard. He's played a much bigger role this year than I think people expected. And absent the LSU game, really, Florida has played very, very well up front, and Ankrum's been a big part of that. And then obviously the safety position has been an area where people have talked extensively about who should be out there, and Taylor's been a part of that rotation and has been a solid contributor. So again, it sort of goes back to what I said about Buchanan. I mean, you need those guys who are cogs who in some capacity just eat up snaps to allow your guys to sort of rotate in and remain fresh. I mean, from Ankrum's perspective, whether he makes the interception against Tennessee or not, obviously that was a huge play there, but you're not necessarily looking for that from him. A lot of times you're looking for him to eat up snaps, to do his job, to allow guys like Grenard and Zuniga to get a blow, and then when they come in to really sort of wreak havoc.
Well, we just mentioned these seniors here, and heck, we don't know. There's some juniors out there too. This might be their last game. They won't get the running out of the tunnel and flowers and get to kiss their families goodbye here on senior day. But this could also be the last time we see C.J. Henderson and Marco Wilson and maybe Trevon Grimes as well. Tadaro, T.J. Slayton's getting a lot of draft love out there, believe it or not, for what he's been able to do at the defensive tackle spot too. There's Kadarius Toney maybe as well. I don't think it. I think he comes back. Some of these guys should come back. But we don't know. There's a lot of assumption going on of whether these guys will come back or won't come back. But this could be the last time we see those guys too.
Yeah, I mean, I think I said this earlier this year that out of the 22 starters, Florida has 19 of them who are going to be draft eligible. So a lot of that is the seniors that we've gone through. Obviously, we've gone through a bunch of seniors, but some of that is the juniors that you expect to leave, and that quite honestly probably should leave. I mean, you look at a guy like C.J. Henderson coming into the year. I think he was a top 10 pick on most people's big boards. I don't know that he's some of the injuries that he's had, and when you get a guy who's in the top 10, you start picking at the things that he can't do, rather than when he has a breakout year saying, hey, that's what he can do. I think maybe that's happened to Henderson a little bit, and certainly with Wilson as well. But I mean, Henderson seeing Wilson's injury, I think, is one of those things that probably impacts some of those guys as well. So yeah, I think there's going to be a couple of juniors who decide to go. I think some of that may be just based on how much they've enjoyed school. Some of that might be that at the end of the day, the finances dictate that you need to do it. Again, I think you say thank you, you tip your cap to them, because these are guys who have contributed to the team and been a big part of the success.
Absolutely, and everybody remembers the whole Ja'Kai Polite story last year and what happened there, and kind of the one player Mullen kind of insinuated maybe should come back for one more season. He didn't, and it didn't last too long in the NFL. So, hopefully these guys make the right decision for them, and the right decision for Florida here, there. So, yep, we'll get to say a lot of goodbyes this coming Saturday night versus FSU. We'll have a quick look at FSU, but before we get there, MyBookie is the place for you because they let you turn all your sports knowledge into cash in your wallet. I mean, between football season, NBA, college basketball season, it's time to get off the sideline and get in on the action with MyBookie. It doesn't matter if you're an experienced player or a first-time customer. MyBookie welcomes all to come play, so quit waiting around and sign up today. This week only, MyBookie is offering a risk-free bet on the Bears Lions game. Simply choose a team against the spread for up to $250. If you win, congrats, you've got extra holiday spending money. If you lose, congratulations to you as well. MyBookie will give you all your money back. It's a no-brainer because you literally cannot lose. It's no risk. It doesn't matter whether you're an experienced player or a first-time customer. MyBookie welcomes all to come play. So right now, head to MyBookie and they'll match your first deposit by 50% all the way up to $1,000. Use promo code Gators to activate the offer. Visit MyBookie online today at mybookie.ag. That's MYBOOKIE.ag. And don't forget to use promo code Gators when creating your account to claim the bonus. Bet, win, get paid at MyBookie. Yeah, well, so FSU, we kind of know the main storyline, of course. Going through the season, firing Willie Taggart after the Miami game. Wasn't even close. What, 27-10? Miami controlled that game all the way. But they kind of going through the season. They had the season opening loss to Boise State. Then a week later, a 1-point win over Louisiana Monroe. Fought hard versus Virginia and lost by a touchdown there. Kind of tooth and nail with Louisville. Blasted by Clemson 45-14, lost to Wake Forest 22-20, bounced back there to beat Syracuse, but then get blasted by Miami. Willie Taggart's fired here, but with two wins this season, a 38-31 victory at Boston College and a 49-12 win versus Alabama State. Odell Haggins performed. He's improved to 4-0 all time as FSU's interim head coach. Directed the Seminoles to final two games of the 2017 season, a 42-10 defeat of Louisiana Monroe, and a 42-13 win over Southern Miss in the Independence Bowl. So not a lot of great competition there for his 4-0 victory. And it's in the four games under Haggins' direction, FSU's outscoring its opponents by an average of 42.8 to 16.5. That's what they should do against those teams there. So, got a coaching change going on. It's got a little bit of confidence for the Seminoles coming into this game Saturday night.
Yeah, well, I mean, here's the deal, right? I mean, they had no business losing that game against Boise State. I'm still not quite sure how they lost that game, and that was, and you can say the same thing about the Wake Forest game. I mean, the last drive there was just a debacle, and you got the Chauncey Gardner-Johnson waving their defense or their offensive guy out of the field. You had the offensive guy lining up in the wrong direction at the line of scrimmage earlier this year. So a lot of the stuff that was going on under Taggart, I think, are things that likely, like the gross negligence is probably going to have resided, right? I mean, can they just get a handle on that? And have not shoot yourself in the foot at the end of the game, those sorts of things. I think, a normal coach should get that stuff under control, and I think we'll probably see a better Florida State team than we've seen all year. The problem is that this Florida State team's pretty bad, and so when you look at the underlying stats, when you look at you dig a little bit deeper, it becomes pretty clear why Florida is 9-2 and Florida State is not. And, there are some games where maybe they could have pulled it out. I mean, that Wake Forest game is one of them. The Boise State game certainly is one of them. So you look at it and say, hey, had those two games gone their way, then they're sitting there at 8-4. And is this a game that we think is a little bit more competitive? But the problem is it didn't go their way. And it didn't go their way because they weren't able to execute at the end of those games. And against a team like Clemson, and I'm not saying Florida's like Clemson, but I think Florida's a whole lot closer to Clemson than they are to Boston College. And against a team like Clemson, it was just a complete outclassing. And I suspect that's probably what we'll see this week.
Yeah, I'll have more in the preview this week, but on the surface here for FSU's offense, whoever is that quarterback, whether it be Hornibrook or Blackman, I mean, look, you got to stop the big playability of Akers and Tamori and Terry, the wide receiver there. You stop those two, I think you have a good chance of getting to the quarterback there because of their offensive line. You stop those two guys, they really can't adjust. Those guys are their playmakers. Those guys are the FSU offense.
Yeah, well, I mean, and if you look at how Florida is equipped to stop those guys, right? I mean, certainly the last few weeks against Georgia with Swift, and then against Vandy with Vaughn, and then against Missouri, they didn't really give up any running either. And so Florida has really progressed in terms of being able to stop the running game. And Cam Akers gave him a little bit of trouble last year, but at the same time, that isn't somebody that I don't think he's better than Swift. I think their offensive line is a lot worse than Georgia's. So I suspect Florida's defense is going to be able to stop them. And then you look at Terry on the outside. Florida's got some guys they can throw at him. And since they've made the switch to having Kaiir Elam on the outside and bringing Marco Wilson inside, I think they have been a little bit better. Certainly the competition has been a little bit less with Vanderbilt and Missouri, but at the same time, the defense has been putting up zeros, and that's all you can really ask. So, one of the interesting things I think is that Blackman, when you look at his splits, and I'm assuming Blackman's going to play, but Blackman, when you look at his splits, averaged 8.9 yards per attempt at home and 7.2 on the road. And so you look at his yards above replacement, 1.11 at home, negative 0.56 on the road. And Trask actually has almost the exact opposite split. So at home, his average yards per attempt is 9.2, and his yards above replacement 0.85. On the road, 7.7 and negative 0.24. So Trask has been very, very good at home. Blackman's been very, very poor away from Tallahassee, and so obviously having the game in the Swamp is a big deal for Florida and a big advantage for Florida in this one.
Another big advantage for Florida, Will. FSU's pass defense, 114th in the nation. So Kyle Trask and this deep wide receiver core for the Gators, the senior leading wide receiver core for the Gators, they might go out on a high note. Look, Mullen even admitted today, they're going to pass the ball. That's just what they are. It would be nice for LaMichael Pirine to get more involved maybe in the run game in his final game in the Swamp, but Florida's going to come out swinging it. Pirine can be involved in that as well. But as bad as FSU's pass defense is, you got to think, Florida and Mullen see something they could take advantage of there.
Yeah, well, I mean, here's the deal, right? Florida State has averaged 28.3 points per game against FBS opponents. Florida's at 30.3, so Florida's a little bit better on the offensive side of the ball. But when you look at the defensive side of the ball, Florida State has given up 29 points per game, and Florida's given up 17.3. That's the differentiator between these two teams. The offenses are similar. I think Florida's probably a little bit better, but the defenses, it's not even close. And it sort of, goes back to what you're saying about the pass defense, that the pass defense for Florida State's been poor, and there's been there's been a tendency for things to snowball. Maybe I don't want to use the word quit,
yeah.
But there's been a tendency for things to snowball where Florida State gets behind by a touchdown or gets behind by 10 points, and then it just gets worse and worse and worse and worse. And so Florida, this is one of those opportunities. Last year they let them hang around there in the first half. I think we're up like 13-7 or 10-7 or something like that at the half. I sincerely hope that Florida just decides to put their boot on Florida State's throat right at the start, because if you get up 14 points, this game's over.
Yeah, absolutely. And with it over, Will, you got to think FSU is going to be really, really concentrating on that head coaching search there and getting that wrapped up pretty soon. And I think you threw your hat in the mix there.
I did. I feel bad for Florida State. They've been having a rough time. It doesn't seem like any of the Stoops brothers want to be there. PJ Fleck re-upped with Minnesota. Urban Meyer is either going to USC or maybe the Dallas Cowboys. And the ACC.
Vince Lombardi's getting an interview next.
Well, Deion Sanders was the rumor a couple of weeks ago, and I was like, "Whoo, Deion!" So basically, I looked at it and said, "If they're going to hire Deion, hire me. I'll do it." Like I'll do. So anyway, I wrote an article detailing why they should hire me as their next head coach, and I think it'll be entertaining for Gator fans. Certainly, it should be entertaining for them to to share with their Florida State fans. There are a few shots that may or may not have been taken in the article, but it's all supposed to be good fun. It's Florida State Hate Week. It's time to enjoy the fact that we've got rivals out there, and that we're doing better than they are right now.
As a tease, Will, what is your best asset that you can bring to Florida State?
So the best asset that I bring is that I'll take the job if I'm offered it. Which seems to be the issue that they're having right now is flying all over the place and having some issues, getting nailing down the deal. But I'm sure they'll be fine. I'm sure they'll bring.
And you won't cost a whole lot.
Well, I'm cheap, man, compared to these guys. Though apparently Taggart didn't sign his contract, so maybe I'm less cheap than them.
Yeah, there's been clarity on that. He actually signed it. FSU did not.
FSU didn't sign the contract. Oh, yeah. Interesting. So, well, I mean, I guess it shouldn't really be a big surprise that Florida State didn't do a very good job of finishing, because that seems to have been a problem for the last 2 years for that program. But I actually do want Florida State to be good. I just don't want them to be as good as Florida, right? Yeah. I think some of the most fun times that anybody's had watching Florida football is when Florida and Florida State were both good and went back and forth, and you lost one every once in a while. And even you look at Spurrier has a losing record, I think, against Bobby Bowden, but losing to Florida State wasn't a shameful thing to do, especially as you were building up that program under Spurrier in the early 90s. And once you overtook them, I mean, heck, won the national championship by beating Florida State. And if the state of Florida is on top of the football world, that's a good thing. So obviously, I hope they get better. I just hope they don't get better than Florida. So hopefully they'll bring in a sort of middling coach, and we'll see what happens. I will say that one of the things that people should check out is I did figure out a way to get Doug Nussmeier rehired as an offensive coordinator there at Florida State if they bring me in. So that was one of the more enjoyable things that I came up with in terms of why they should hire me. So anyway, I thought it was kind of amusing. Hopefully everybody else does too.
Absolutely. Well, before we wrap up, favorite FSU memory, and I'll give you, I guess, the choices here. Is it the 96 national championship win over them? Is it 97 season, of course? Kwesi gets behind the defense, and, of course, Florida goes on to what maybe many people call the loudest game in the Swamp and upset at number 1 FSU? Or is it claiming Ron Zook Field in Tallahassee?
I mean, I'd say it's Ron Zook Field because I was there for that. Okay. I was actually on campus when that was going on. The 96 and 97, I was still living in Indiana. So Florida wasn't real. I mean, they were on my radar because I was watching college football, but they weren't necessarily a team that I was thinking I was going to go to the school, because we didn't move to Florida until 1997. But it's interesting. My favorite memory might be the last game Tebow played in the Swamp with all of the flash bulbs flashing. Yeah. I mean, it was just a really cool thing to see a guy who came back for his senior year, all the adulation that guy gets. And I think sometimes there are times where maybe the power of Tebow's star took something away from some of his teammates there. Certainly, I think when people look back at the promise and all that sort of stuff, there's that was a team that really was a dominant team, and there were a lot of really good players on there. But that senior night with Tebow and the connection that he had with the fans, and then just absolutely demolishing Florida State, that was probably the one that sticks out in my mind. As well as on the bad side, the 29-2 loss a few years ago. But I brought my daughter to that one. That was her first game, so that's one that's pretty near and dear to my heart too. Even though I'm still, I think Treon missed again over there.
Yeah, the Tebow, Spikes, all those guys senior night. That one really does speak. And like you said, because I was working, I just started for the TV station, so I was working for the TV station for 2 years at the time. No, I've been 3 years. I'm in 2009, so I was working at the TV station for 3 years on the sideline with the camera in my hand, shooting the game, and Tebow's about to go and score that last touchdown. As you said, I'm on the sideline, so looking at the student section, and you're right. I mean, the flash bulbs, you don't see that anymore because nobody has flashes on their cameras. It's just camera phones now that you don't see the pop of flash anymore. But that's you're right. Seeing all those flashes, and then after the game, that whole senior class, and basically the whole team, just out there clapping all the fans' hands because it was their last game in the Swamp, and they were out there, taking a lap around the Swamp, and all that. You still see him do that every now and then, but that night in particular, cause that was Tebow's last night in the swamp. Spikes and all those guys that we love so much. It was their last night in the swamp. So yeah, you're right. That one holds a place near and dear as far as FSU games go. But yeah, I mean, it's hard to beat the first ever national championship and beating your rivals in doing it, and then the very next year in '97 as well. So a lot of good memories, and hopefully Saturday night will be another one. So, Will, anything else coming up? I know. Happy Thanksgiving to you, man, and to your family out there, and everybody else out there. Anything? What you got coming up this week?
Yeah, I'm gonna have a season preview up. I think Olivia might be writing something as well this week, and we'll get everybody ready for the Florida State game. And certainly, yeah, there'll be some time to, hopefully everybody will come over and read my stuff after devouring some turkey and watching some of the NFL games. So this is always my favorite time of year. I mean, this is the problem is the season's ending, but man, you got a rival, you got 4 days off, you got family in town, and then just sort of get to sit back and on Saturday night see the seniors go out there, and whether it's in Tallahassee where all those seniors and you get to ruin their senior night, or whether it's in Gainesville where you get to make their senior night where it gets to be a special thing, especially because it's been a while since Florida's won one in the swamp. Yep. So to give the fans that, and hopefully the fans will come out and give 90,000 strong to make sure that it's a loud send off for these guys, and they've been a big part of the Florida program. And it's one of those things where I think every year you look at the seniors and you get a little bit sentimental about it, but this particular group is one that I think has really sort of cemented its connection with the fans, and it's going to be fun.
Absolutely. Let a turnaround and get that Gator standard up for Dan Mullen. That's what a lot of these seniors have been able to do in their time here as Florida Gators. That's Will Miles. You can find him on Twitter at Will Miles SEC, and his site readandreaction.com. Go check it out this week, as his FSU preview will be up, and why Will is a great candidate for the FSU job. I'm the host of Gators Breakdown, David Waters. You can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. Guys and girls out there, thanks for listening to this episode of Gators Breakdown.